Europe westward towards the lowlands. Couldn't believe they could just keep going night and day and so forth. And it was later learned that they were dispensing large amounts of amphetamines to these troops.
Hitler is injected as many as 5 times a day with methamphetamine, a supercharged amphetamine. Scholars claim Hitler's mad rants and blunders were the result of his addiction to the drug. It is also used in the Japanese war effort, given to the Imperial ground forces and kamikaze pilots. The drug of the Axis war machine is a stimulant. It affects the sympathetic nervous system to increase alertness and decrease fatigue. Amphetamines stimulate the adrenal gland to increase spontaneity, initiative, confidence, and a sense of well-being. Amphetamines are commonly associated with appetite suppression, but the drug was first introduced as a lung decongestant, the Benzedrine inhaler, nicknamed Benny in Germany in 1932.
It would clear up your sinuses and do a lot of other things. It wasn't long before people discovered that if you break the inhaler and take the cotton swab, the little cotton swab, which holds all of the amphetamine, some people just swallowed it whole, other people dissolved it in coffee or what have you.
Well, I was just wondering about those bennies and things we've been fooling around with.
A Benny? A Benny? You mean a Benzedrine tablet?
This method of ingestion is commonly called poppin' bennies. At the time, no one knew how highly addictive and powerful a stimulant amphetamines were.
It was quite euphorogenic. It gave people a sense of confidence. Life seemed brighter. You didn't have to sleep as much. You could overcome fatigue. It made doing boring things more interesting. And, of course, weight loss.
1946, amphetamines find their way into post-war society. In Japan, the market is flooded with vast amounts of the drug. In America, housewives take speed to feel better. Amphetamines are to the 50s what opiates were in the past. Truck drivers take them to stay up for days, like dock workers who once used cocaine to work through the night. And artists and writers who used laudanum a century ago now pop bennies for kicks and inspiration. Like author Jack Kerouac, while popping Benzedrine, he writes On the Road in 20 Days in 1955.
Meth's the all-American drug. Meth was invented for Americans. It really embodies all of the values that we hold dear. Industriousness, hard work, basically enthusiasm for accomplishing tasks. It was the most widely prescribed drug in America's history.
The appeal of amphetamines cuts across all walks of life. One of the most famous users is the newly drafted Elvis Aaron Presley. In October 1958, Presley begins a tour of duty in West Germany. As an Army GI, a sergeant introduces him to speed. From this point on, the king of rock and roll is hooked for the rest of his life.
Drugs must be prescribed by a doctor and prepared by a licensed pharmacist.
And physicians were the real pushers of this drug. You're a little depressed? Here, let me prescribe some form of amphetamine. You want to lose weight? Here, let me prescribe some amphetamine. You say you don't have enough energy? I mean, the reasons were legion. In 1946, a physician by the name of W.R. Bett published a paper in which he claimed there were 39 medical reasons for prescribing amphetamines. And they were everything from hiccups to schizophrenia.
By the 1960s, amphetamine use was a hidden epidemic. On the other hand, marijuana, once kept behind closed doors, is openly used. Unlike methamphetamine, a legal drug, marijuana has been outlawed by the Marijuana Stamp Act of 1937. Users face fines and jail sentences under federal law. But it is the latest drug fad, the favorite of baby boomers, despite these potentially harsh penalties.
Marijuana is kind of a hybrid. It has some features that are like LSD. It also doesn't produce physical dependence, and it doesn't produce overdose deaths. And the fact that it doesn't do those two things makes it seem like it's not, quote, an addictive drug. It has an appeal to people who are smart and who are interested in going beyond the conventional boundaries of their behavior.
33 years after the Marijuana Tax Act, its constitutionality was questioned in the Supreme Court. The man who led the charge to change the law was the man who told a generation to tune in, turn on, and drop out. Timothy Leary.
Timothy Leary, the LSD guru, argued that in order to get the license, one had to break the law. In other words, one had to have the marijuana before you got the license, and therefore you were already in violation of the law, and therefore getting the license was simply self-incrimination. The Supreme Court agreed with him and overturned the law.
In the slam of a gavel, the federal law that banned marijuana vanished. Until 1914, most people believed the Constitution upheld one's right to ingest any substance one wanted. Besides, a drug that made you feel better was perceived as good. But by 1970, recreational drug use was perceived as bad, and Congress didn't consider the right to use drugs a right protected by the Constitution, and banned marijuana in the Controlled Substance Act of 1970.
A lot of people became concerned with drugs for the first time in the 60s because young people were using them with such seeming freedom and recklessness. They were particularly concerned about marijuana.
The new federal law is on firm constitutional ground, unlike the self-incriminating tax of 1937. But still, marijuana use does not end. It just becomes illegal and finds a place in a subculture of its own that includes a comedy troupe and a magazine. Unlike pot, methamphetamine is not completely illegal. It can still be prescribed by doctors, but illegal, non-medicinal use is at an all-time high.
It's estimated that by 1971, so many amphetamine pills were produced illicitly that if you gave them to every man, woman, and child in the country, you would give them 50 apiece.
Methamphetamine is banned for non-medicinal use. Still, it is manufactured illegally in all 50 states. Missouri and Utah can claim the dubious prize as meth lab capitals of the U.S. Naively and innocently put on the market as the Benzedrine inhaler almost 70 years ago, no one could predict amphetamine's damage.
People who used a lot of amphetamines tended to be trigger-happy about violence. First of all, they become a little paranoid and they misinterpret something and think that that person is out to do them harm, and they, give them a punch or worse.
Amphetamines are also the preferred drug of the sports world. Pro football, horse racing, and bicycle racing are breeding grounds for speed abuse. While racing the Tour de France, Tommy Simpson collapses and dies under the influence of methamphetamine.
Speed kills by blowing your heart up. It actually can blow your heart up. I mean, you'll get the heart muscle, you'll get it to rip a hole in itself. The messages that are being sent by the brain are just completely out of whack.
Recreational use of this addictive drug ruins thousands of lives. Despite its dangers, its powers of addiction claim new addicts every day.
That first shot of speed was like having an orgasm. I didn't have to have a man. I didn't have to have anybody. I just stood there and backed up and sat down on the couch, and it was unbelievable. And it was a rush, a high that I knew I had found what I was looking for in my whole life. And I was off and running.
While amphetamines have long been prescribed by doctors, medicinal marijuana has only gained acceptance in the 90s. Today, it is used by AIDS and cancer patients to stimulate appetite and reduce the nausea from chemotherapy. It's also a treatment for glaucoma. The attitude of the American public towards marijuana is most fickle. Once, the federal government was opposed to a national marijuana law, but enacted one anyway in 1937, only to see it overturned 30 years later by the Supreme Court. In 1970, a new federal law banned marijuana again, citing it was of no medicinal use. But today, marijuana is used legally for that very reason. Now, at the